Okay, let's get started. So today we're talking about gaming the system, which is my term for sort of a broad array of different sort of bizarre things that are happening in the digital economy. The argument I want to make today is that there's a sort of common pattern behind a lot of these weird things, and we'll try and uncover what it is today. So we've looked at a number of the core dynamics of the digital economy and how it functions. So we've looked at things like platforms, peer production, and importantly last week, the incentives of the attention economy. Now, the question I want to look at today is how does this particular system of incentives create a series of unintended consequences? So what happens when things like followers, likes, numbers of views, what happens when they become a de facto online currency? So we saw last week some of the consequences of this. When you take on the attention economy, companies start deciding to create addictive apps, to create addictive smartphones. This is a sort of unintended consequence of the attention economy. Today we're going to look more broadly at some of the consequences. So we'll begin with what I call the dialectic of measurement and gaming. It's a sort of truism that if you measure something, you create an incentive to optimize for that metric. So we measure, for instance, the quality of your schoolwork by giving you a grade on your assessments. Now, it makes sense, of course, for you to optimize towards getting the best possible grade on that assessment without any other concern for anything else. Now, there's a number of other great examples throughout history. If you look at Soviet planning, so the Soviet Union famously had a system of somewhat centralized planning, and part of that centralized system involved building up metrics for the economy. So one somewhat apocryphal story about the Soviet Union was that they had a goal which said that factories had to output a certain tonnage of trucks. So over the course of the year, perhaps you had to put out, 100 tons worth of trucks. And failing that, that factory would be subject to some sort of disciplinary action. What happened? Well, factories ended up putting out really heavy trucks. They decided the best way to meet that metric was to put out a really heavy truck, and therefore you didn't have to put out a lot of trucks, but just a few really heavy ones. And of course, those trucks, were pretty much unusable. They destroyed the roads that they drove on, but they met that metric. So you create a metric, and you end up creating a certain system of incentives to go with it. Now, interestingly enough, artificial intelligence today is having a similar sort of problem. So there's a particular approach to artificial intelligence called reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning involves setting up particular rewards. We may all be locked in here. I'm not sure how it works. So artificial intelligence, reinforcement learning involves letting a little artificial intelligence roam free within an artificial environment and having them learn the best way to optimize for particular rewards. Now, what really is difficult about this is setting the appropriate rewards for these artificial intelligences. So I'll give you an example here. This is a racing game that they've built an artificial intelligence for, and when they first did it, the optimal reward that they set, the metric that they set for this artificial intelligence was get as many points as possible. And here's what happened. So you have this little boat running around, racing through the course. But it quickly learns that one of the best ways to get points is to just go in this circle here. And this is what it ends up doing for the rest of the race. It never actually finishes the race. It gets last place, but it racks up a huge amount of points by just going in this circle here. So this is a problem of setting the appropriate metrics, setting the appropriate rewards, and then having some sort of unintended consequences result from that. Today, we have a whole, an entire system of similar metrics online. So much of the internet is about meeting these metrics. It's about optimizing towards these things. And just like the Soviet Union and just like artificial intelligence, it turns out there's a lot of unintended consequences once we start building up these metrics. Now, there's been many, many ways we've tried to measure things online before and measure attention. If you remember from last week, we talked briefly about Herbert Simon, who back in the 1960s was already talking about the attention economy. Now, he came up with an idea about how to measure attention back in the day. And he says that attention should be measured by the amount of time an average business executive, a person he identified as having a bachelor's degree and an IQ of 120, spends focused on something. Such attention units would capture the cost in addition to any monetary outlay of receiving information. So this is what Herbert Simon thought would be the sort of optimal way of measuring attention. Now, of course, we can't actually do something like that. So instead, we have a whole series of other metrics for trying to measure attention online. So we have things like the number of unique visitors that visit a website, time spent on a website, whether it's 5 seconds or whether it's 5 minutes or whether it's 5 hours, the amount of content that gets produced on a particular site, the number of users who happen to see that content. Of course, what it means to see that content varies from platform to platform. And then things like monthly active users, which is a very popular metric online. Now, if we look at monthly active users, we see things like Facebook absolutely dominates in terms of monthly active users. YouTube has a huge amount as well. But one thing, for instance, that this metric misses is the level of engagement. So Twitter, you see, doesn't have a whole lot of monthly active users, but Twitter users tend to be quite engaged with the platform, much more so than something like YouTube, which tends to be more of a passive medium. So these metrics, they get some things, but they miss others. Now, once we've established these metrics, companies and users and websites and platforms all try and optimize to game these systems. And early attempts involve things like search engine optimization. So search engine optimization is basically about creating a website that attracts search engine bots. So you want, when people are searching for the topic of your website, you want it to appear at the top of the search engine listings. So there's a whole series of tricks that you can do to try and manipulate and get your ranking higher in a search engine. Now, what this led to in the early years of the internet was things like content farms. So websites that had a minimal amount of information, but they were designed to attract search engine attention and to eventually gain ad revenue. So the internet back in the early 2000s, for instance, was absolutely littered with these sorts of things. All attempts to basically get the attention of search engines and get more ad revenue. Now, this ended back in about 2013. Google changed the way that it organized search engine results, precisely in an effort to exclude these sort of low-quality websites. So it tried to ban content farms, and it effectively made it no longer a viable option to try and game the system. So these sites basically saw their traffic drop immensely. The ad revenue that they had been gaining as a result of it no longer worked anymore. Now, what ends up happening is we get a second round of gaming the system. And this is something I think we're all well familiar with, which is clickbait. Clickbait is something which emerged in about 2013, 2014. It didn't really exist until that point in time. And the simple reason why is because, first of all, Google changed their algorithm. But second, Facebook became the biggest referral site. So it was no longer Google referring sites to people. Instead, Facebook became the dominant way that sites were referred to people. What happens is that if you want your content to spread on the internet, it's no longer about optimizing for a search engine. Instead, it's about optimizing how does it get shared on social media? How does it go viral on Facebook? That became the big question for gaming the system, for getting your stuff to become popular, and getting the ad results, ad revenue as a result. Now, in 2013, 2014, this leads to the rise of sites like Upworthy, which have very familiar headlines. We're all familiar with these sorts of headlines nowadays. Things that are basically designed to entice you to click on that link, to try and find out what exactly happened. What are they talking about? Headlines which have this sort of uplifting, emotionally charged aspect to them. And Upworthy was the first site to do this really, really well. And they basically perfected the art of clickbait. And what we have today, still to this day, is that a lot of the internet is still based around this sort of headline, which again started in 2013. Now that's interesting because the entire internet starts to take on this particular aesthetic. When you see an ad, it's a clickbait sort of headline. When you see a lot of news sites, they have clickbait headlines. So the entire aesthetic of the internet changes as a result of trying to game the system. Now going viral becomes sort of the premier way to get more attention. So we'll look at a number of different ways that companies and websites and platforms try and go viral nowadays. So there's been a lot of research into what makes things go viral. Key things tend to be emotional arousal, good storytelling, and practical utility. I think this helps explain some of the dynamics of social media as well. So emotional arousal is really important. And a lot of what goes viral today is things that make people angry, things that make people annoyed, things that make people happy. It's things which are spreading these certain affects around and creating the internet as we know it today. So I think there's a fairly good argument to be made that a lot of the anger that we find online is partly a product of people trying to go viral. So you present your headline in the sort of most anger-inducing way simply because you know that's going to draw a lot of attention, it's going to draw a lot of clicks, it's going to make your site lots of ad revenue. So making things go viral has become a key goal, and it's basically become an art form in itself. Now, making something go viral is not just dependent on particular metrics, things like shares, likes, retweets, whatever. It's also dependent on the algorithms that filter for content. So when Facebook changes its news feed, or when Google changes its search engine algorithm, this has a huge impact on what goes viral and what doesn't go viral. This becomes a really big challenge for companies. If they want their content to continue to go viral, every time that Facebook changes their news feed, they have to rethink their entire approach to this stuff. I'll give you one example, which is Upworthy again. You can see that Upworthy's traffic jumped up massively from about 2013 onwards. At its peak, it had about 90 million users per month. What happened is that Facebook then changed their algorithm on their news feed, and it dropped down Upworthy's traffic to about 20 million today. So from a peak of 90 million to 20 million is a huge drop in traffic simply as a result of a change in Facebook's newsfeed. And Upworthy hasn't really been able to sort of solve the problem of how do you continue to go viral. Now there are exceptions. One exception is a website called Bored Panda, which is based out of Lithuania. They have been one of the most successful in terms of maintaining attention and maintaining virality, despite the fact that Facebook's been changing the newsfeed. They aim mostly at sort of lightweight, inoffensive content, things which aren't necessarily designed to anger you or anything like that, but they're sort of nice things to look at. You sort of get that sense with the name Bored Panda. It's not exactly an anger-inducing site. They currently have about 15 million likes on Facebook, so they're a huge sort of traffic generator on Facebook, and they get multiples of that in terms of interaction. So comments, likes, shares, all of that sort of stuff. One tactic though, so companies will use a lot of different ways to try and get their content to go viral. Some of it is more overtly manipulative than others. So Bored Panda has just gone a sort of content-based route. Others try to manipulate the systems. One way systems are manipulated is through what's known as tweet decking. And tweet decking is a phenomenon where young users on Twitter with large followers, so usually in the tens of thousands of followers on Twitter, they get invited to share in a TweetDeck group. So TweetDeck is a particular sort of interface for Twitter. It's basically a curated feed of posts. Now, once you're a member of that group, and again, it's a sort of private group, you end up retweeting and sharing any content that appears in that feed. So what does this mean? It basically means that any content that appears in that particular TweetDeck gets retweeted and shared by a whole large group of people who have large follower bases. What happens is that companies will pay to get their content onto that TweetDeck. So if your content goes onto this TweetDeck, suddenly it's being shared in a seemingly informal way by a number of different people with huge follower counts on Twitter. And this is a way in which content goes viral. So a number of sort of viral memes have started because of tweet decking. And companies are paying money to get their content onto it. Now, a similar tactic is actually used across social media. So this is a sort of formal system, but there's also more informal versions as well. So just people with high follower counts will sometimes make informal deals with each other where they basically say, okay, you retweet 3 of my things today, and I'll retweet 3 of your things today. And that's a way, again, to have their content get spread around really widely and have it go viral. Again, companies are getting involved, so they pay these people to have their content spread around. It's not advertising in any traditional sense, but it's just simply paying people to try and artificially manufacture a viral nature of these things. And these users end up making hundreds of dollars per tweet. So if you're doing, 1 or 2 of these tweets a day, you're making a few $100 every single day by doing this sort of thing. So again, it's companies wanting attention, people wanting money, and it creates these artificially viral things. Another thing companies do, and this is something that Upworthy perfected, is they manipulate headlines. So one of the rules for Upworthy was that when you send out a news story, you have to write 20 to 25 different headlines for it. And it will go out, all those different headlines will go out to different people. And basically an algorithm will monitor and see which headline is gaining the most traction. And whichever headline is gaining the most traction, it will retroactively change the headline for all the other versions as well. So you try and manipulate the headlines to gain as much attention as possible. Which is again why you get this sort of same aesthetic over and over again with clickbait headlines, is precisely because algorithms are choosing which are the optimal headlines. Okay. Now, more recently, we've come across fake news. Fake news gained a lot of attention, particularly in the wake of Trump being elected. Fake news is often blamed for Trump being elected. I think that's really overstating the case and the power of fake news. But it's undoubtedly the case that we have seen a spread of conspiracy theories, of completely artificial stories, of lies, particularly about political candidates. But it turns out fake news is a pretty rational response to the incentives of the attention economy. Fake news is created not necessarily for manipulating politics. Instead, fake news is about going viral. So just like people were doing search engine optimization, just like people are doing clickbait, fake news is a product of that system. So for instance, a BBC investigation found that thousands of people in Kosovo are every single day creating fake news. These creators would basically build this fake news. They would use it to build up a large following on things like Facebook, and then they could use that and turn that into ad revenue for themselves. Now, at its peak, they could earn about 600 euros a day, which is a pretty good living to make, especially in a country like Kosovo. So these people creating fake news, most of them have no political intentions whatsoever. It's simply a way to make money. It's a response to the attention economy, and it's a completely rational response as well. I think it makes total sense that if you want to make money, here's a nice simple way to do so. So I think, again, a lot of the dynamics that we see today, a lot of the sort of weird things that we see on the internet, they're products of the incentive structure that we've built up. Now, fake news leads us to a more general problem, and this is what I call the fake economy overall. I should ask, are there any questions so far? Anything that's unclear? Okay. So the fake economy. When we look at social media platforms, the currency is not just money. It's followers, it's views, it's likes, it's shares, it's retweets. This is the currency of social media. This is the currency of the attention economy. And there's every single incentive, considering the sort of bonuses you can get from having a high follower count, there's every incentive to game the system, to create fake followers, fake views, and fake likes. And this is exactly what we see happening. So to begin with, we see fake followers. It's become a major, major industry and a major concern for platforms as well. So estimates are that Twitter has about 48 million accounts that are fake. And Facebook, the estimates are about 60 million accounts are fake there. These are probably conservative estimates as well. It becomes very difficult to try and exactly measure these sorts of things. But taking a conservative estimate, we have millions and millions of fake accounts on these platforms already. And I should mention these estimates are higher than what the companies themselves admit. They argue that it's much, much lower than this, but it's probably not. Now, most of these are bots of some type, and there's arguably about 3 different types of bots. So the first type of bot simply is a scheduled bot. So the Big Ben Twitter account is a good example of this. Every single hour it tweets out bong. And very simply, you know, the sample code for it is when it's this particular time of day, tweet out bong. So very simple sort of bot there, not really harmful in any sort of sense. Another type of bot is what's known as a watcher bot. And these are bots that monitor other sites, or they monitor other Twitter accounts or other Facebook accounts, and they post messages when there's some sort of change. So an example here is the San Francisco Quake bot, which monitors another website for when there's some sort of quake, some sort of earthquake, and then it tweets about it. So again, very sort of simple coding for it, very simple sort of bot, but it is artificial. Lastly, we come to amplification bots. And these are the ones that we're particularly concerned about today. So an amplification bot tweets or does something when the client tweets or does something. So in this example, when John Leguizamo tweets, all of the amplification bots tied into that client will retweet him. So they will artificially make it appear that he's getting a lot of retweets when actually most of them are bots. Or they'll artificially make it look like he's getting a lot of likes, even though it's just little computer programs. So amplification bots are increasingly pervasive, and they're sort of what we're going to be focused on today. Now, there's entire businesses which are set up to create fake social media accounts. You can go right now, you can Google for it, fake followers on Twitter, fake followers on Facebook, and you can find these websites which, for a fee, will provide fake followers to you. They're called account farms or follower factories, but they're designed to create these fake accounts and then give them to any clients that are willing to pay for them. Now, usually they'll begin by creating tens of thousands of high-quality bots. It used to be the case, if you're on Twitter at all, it used to be a case that a lot of Twitter bots were eggs. So this is the default profile photo on Twitter. If you don't change it, this is what you're automatically given. And most bots on Twitter had this as their default, as their profile pic, simply because it was the default. Now, Twitter made a change to their algorithm where if you've got a default profile pic, you no longer become all that visible. So basically, this became a losing way to create a bot. What companies have had to do is to create much more high-quality bots nowadays. So what they often do is they steal other people's profiles and they create slight variations on them. So this is an example here where the top left-hand account is the real account, and then these account farms have created multiple versions of the exact same one, just with slight variations in it. So slight variations in the username, slight variations in the profile pic, and all that sort of stuff. And these then become fake accounts that can be used for when a client buys fake followers. So this can, this is all actually oftentimes hand done. So if you want to create, for instance, an account on Facebook, it's very hard to automate it because you have to verify it, you have to do all these sorts of loops and everything. It can be quite hard to automate a lot of this stuff to create a high quality bot. So a lot of this stuff ends up getting done by hand. At the same time, these follower factories will also create a much larger group of low-quality bots. So they've got a handful of high-quality bots which look like real accounts, and then they've got a whole bunch of low-quality bots which are quite clearly bots. If you've been on social media for very long, you've undoubtedly come across these at some point in time where you just recognize immediately that that's a fake account. So basically what happens is that a client will come to these companies, they'll say, I want, say, 20,000 followers. The company will give them the 10,000 high-quality followers that they have, and then they'll give them 10,000 low-quality followers as well. Now, for platforms, this has a lot of implications. It has important implications in particular for their business. So Facebook, about 96% of its revenue comes from advertising. Twitter, it's about, I think, 99% of its revenue comes from advertising. Advertisers have to believe that there's a real audience. If that audience is just a bunch of bots, advertisers are not going to pay money to these platforms. So the rise of these fake bots, these fake followers, really puts into question a lot of the business models of these platforms. So it's become a real issue for them about what to do about it. In addition to fake followers, we also have things like fake YouTube views. So this is, again, a growing industry for inflating YouTube views. Just like fake followers, you can go and Google this right now, and you could purchase a bunch of fake YouTube views for any video that you wanted right away. This is a multi-million-dollar business. So the New York Times did an investigation into it. They found that one person in 1 year was making about $200,000 by doing this. He'd faked about 15 million views and made $200,000 from it. Another company had made $1.2 million from an estimated 196 million fake views. So this is a very lucrative business for the people who are faking these views. And this is used by a lot of people. It's not just the people you might think, sort of people who have never had attention before, who are desperate to get some sort of attention. Oftentimes this is used by big businesses, it's used by celebrities, it's used by all sorts of people who just want to pretend that they have more people viewing their videos than they actually do. Now, this is causing real problems at YouTube. So YouTube trains its algorithms to look for abnormal behavior. And the abnormal behavior is deemed to be a bot and is therefore blocked. What's happening is that YouTube is reaching the point where the number of bots are outnumbering the number of humans. At that point in time, you reach the point where humans are the abnormality and bots are what is considered normal. So the algorithms then flip and start seeing human behavior as being the abnormality to be excluded. So in YouTube, in the industry, this is known as what's called the inversion. And it's something that they're quite concerned about if bots become too dominant on the platform. Now, it's not all just bots. Here's an example of a click farm which is running a huge amount of smartphones to try and rack up views on YouTube.
有些人看我的视频没有点赞就离开了，可有些人还没看完，随手就是一个赞，因为他们知道每个人都不容易，随手一个赞就是对年轻人最大的鼓励。如果你也是。
So yeah, so these sorts of things happening all over the place.
有些人看我的视频。
So we've got fake followers, we've got fake YouTube, we've got fake news, and we've also got fake ad views as well. So this is again becoming a lucrative way for people to make money online. Now companies, when they're advertising online, they want two things in particular. They want real people to view those ads, and they want high quality sites for those ads to appear on. So you want your advertising to appear on the New York Times rather than some budget news site online. Now it turns out both of these things can be faked. So here's one example where scammers were using malware to redirect traffic to websites which pretended to be much higher quality websites than they actually were. So it pretended to be the New York Times, it pretended to be the Guardian, but actually it was just some website that had been set up purely to direct this traffic to. Views were then created by malware-led bots, which again pretended that these ads were being viewed much more than they actually were. Now, interestingly enough, these bots had to perform quite elaborate routines in order to pretend that they were real people. So this is a quote from one study of this stuff. It says that bots faked clicks, mouse movements, and social network login information to masquerade as engaged human consumers. Some were sent to browse the internet to gather tracking cookies from other websites, just as a human visitor would have done through regular behavior. Fake people with fake cookies and fake social media accounts, fake moving their fake cursors, fake clicking on fake websites, and all to generate fake ad views. So, this is sort of what the fake economy is all about. Is an increasing amount of it just isn't real. It's created by bots. This is again a huge problem for platforms that make money through advertising. How can they guarantee that when they say they've got a certain amount of ad views, how can they guarantee that it's real? And it turns out that they can't. Facebook right now, despite all the data that it collects and all the information that it has, is still unable to offer accurate metrics about the amount of traffic and the number of viewers to advertisers. And if you sort of get involved in the ad industry, you realize that this is a real controversy. Advertisers want to have some sense that when they put their ad on Facebook, it's real people viewing it. And Facebook just can't guarantee that. So estimates are that Facebook views for ads may be inflated by as much as 900%. So these aren't a small amount. This isn't a small difference. This is a huge, huge difference between what is actually being viewed and what is artificially being inflated. So it seems increasingly like the very fundamentals of the internet are fake. Now I want to turn towards the impact of all of this on aesthetics. And I mean aesthetics quite broadly. So how does our experience, how does the internet appear to us? And I want to make the argument today that increasingly a large part of it appears in a way which is mutated by these unintended consequences. So we've already talked about clickbait, for instance, the rise of clickbait headlines everywhere. That's part of the internet aesthetic nowadays. So yeah, the efforts made to manipulate these systems, optimize for online metrics, all of this has a major impact on the aesthetics of the internet. The first of these I want to look at is advertising. So how has online advertising changed the aesthetics of the internet? Now, I think there's an obvious way, which is the flourishing of ads everywhere. So pop-up ads everywhere, ads that autoplay music or autoplay video. I use an ad blocker, and whenever I can't use an ad blocker, I'm always sort of amazed at how ugly the internet is. It's just absolutely atrocious to use the internet without an ad blocker, simply because these things are taking over every website. And increasingly on things like Facebook as well. It's just ads everywhere. So that's an obvious way in which online ads are changing the aesthetic of the internet. But there's also a more subtle impact. This has to do with the way in which online advertising works. And effectively, the consequence is that it slows down the internet, particularly mobile internet. Now, why is this the case? Online advertising, it turns out, is quite difficult to do. And when it first started up, it wasn't really clear how to do it in an efficient way. The question for a company would be, how do you know which website to put your ad on? So you might know your target customer, you might know who you want your ad to appear to, but then you have to figure out what websites are they visiting, how often are they visiting them, where are they looking on those websites. You have to understand all these added aspects, and then you have to do that for every single website. And it becomes incredibly difficult for a company to try and target their customers as a result. So this was a very traditional approach to advertising, which is effectively a sort of billboard approach. You find an optimal space to buy an ad, and then you hope that your audience goes by and looks at it. Now, that was a very sort of suboptimal way of doing online advertising. So what emerged was things like ad networks and programmatic advertising. Now, what happens today with online advertising is that instead of buying a particular ad space, advertisers will now buy a target customer. And they will directly try and reach that target customer, irregardless of the various websites that they might visit. This is why, for instance, the same ad will follow you around on the internet, because advertisers are paying to reach you rather than to just place an ad on any particular website. Now, importantly, this involves a number of different steps. And this is a sort of simplified version here. When a user requests a URL, so you go onto a website, the publisher will check to see if they have any directly sold ads available. So let's say you've got a banner ad at the top. The first thing the website does is check is that pre-sold to somebody else. If not, you go to an ad network. So you go to the ad network or the ad exchange, you ask for an ad. That ad exchange will then have a built-up profile of the user across all the different websites that they visited. It will send the anonymized user profile and website description to a variety of demand-side platforms, which are the ones who are actually selling the ad. Those demand-side platforms then examine the user profile and the website description and a host of other factors. They then offer up a price that they're willing to pay to serve an ad to the user. And then what happens is that a bunch of different advertisers in real time will bid for that ad space. So the ad exchange then selects the highest price, it retrieves the ad, and then it sends it back to the publisher to display. And that is for one ad to appear on one website at any one point in time. All of these steps have to go on. And it turns out it's not exactly the quickest process. They've tried to speed it up, they've tried to make it efficient, but it does effectively mean that websites which could be much, much quicker are actually being slowed down by the internet. So particularly when you're sort of scrolling through the internet on your phone and you're wondering why it might be so slow, a lot of it has to do with advertising nowadays. Websites don't need to be so cumbersome and laborious, but advertising means that they have to be. So before a web page can fully load up, it has to go through this entire process, often numerous times. And it's an incredibly complex process that's going on behind the scenes every time that an ad is served up to you. So that's one impact of the sort of gaming of the system on internet aesthetics. Not just pop-up ads everywhere, but actually a real slowing of the user experience. Next we have YouTube monstrosities, which is one of my favorite examples of the sort of unintended consequences of all these systems we've built up. Now YouTube has become an increasingly popular babysitter. I've got an 8-month-old at the moment, and right now it's really quite easy to just put him in front of a TV and let him watch Netflix or whatever for an hour or two and allow me to get some work done. I can absolutely see the allure of using YouTube for a babysitter, and it is becoming increasingly popular. Parents will just put their children in front of a tablet or in front of a TV, and the children will watch it for oftentimes hours at a time. Interestingly enough, when you look at the most popular videos for children, they're not sort of short 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute videos. They're oftentimes 3 hours long videos. And this is part of the art of creating good YouTube videos for children, is that they are thrown together into extremely long things where parents don't have to worry about it. Now, last year, parents started complaining about YouTube. They started complaining because things like this started appearing on their children's screen. This is, Disney characters here, sort of mutated versions of Disney characters, and you've got Mickey Mouse who has been hit by a car and seems to be dying in a pool of his own blood on the ground. This is appearing on children's videos in YouTube. And parents started started causing a massive uproar about why was this happening? Why is YouTube allowing this sort of stuff on their platform? It's not just violence as well. So there's a number of sexual situations involving these cartoon characters, and it seems to be proliferating. So the question is, well, why is this happening? Well, first of all, the online kids market is huge. If you look at the top YouTube content producers in terms of subscribers, in terms of the amount of views, it's not things like Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber or anything like that. The most popular ones oftentimes are children's stuff. So they've got millions of subscribers and they have billions and billions of views. So it's a massive market. If you remember, every single view is ad money. So if the children's market can gain billions of views, there's again a real incentive to be creating videos for that market. Now what seems to be happening here is that some people have started to create, have started to automate the creation of these videos. If these videos make decent ad money for their creators, and there's every suggestion that they do, they can possibly make, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year or even millions of dollars a year through these videos. These people are learning now to automate these videos. So what's happening is When a new hot trend emerges, say a popular new nursery rhyme or a popular new cartoon, or what's really popular apparently amongst children is unboxing videos, what will happen is the content producers will automatically produce thousands and thousands of variations on those same things. And it turns out that it's much easier to automate the production of these things when it's animated. So these animations are automatically created from stock images, and then the videos are just pumped out without any sort of human oversight about them. And it turns out they create some rather twisted versions as a result. So the sort of videos like this one are probably the automatic creation of a video and trying to gain some sort of ad revenue. And of course, the reason why they focus on kids' videos is because animations are very easy to automate. You don't need a human cast to do it. And also, kids don't judge if the narrative makes no sense. So most of these videos, if you ever watch them, and they're quite easy to find on YouTube, they have no narrative sense whatsoever. But kids don't mind. So it's much easier to get it past kids than anybody else. So what's happening here? In a desire to get ad revenue, we've automated the production of YouTube monstrosities. So we're changing the aesthetics of the internet as a result of these systems. So the final thing I want to talk about today is the end of authenticity. We like to imagine digital industries and the internet more broadly as a space where humans interact in more or less transparent ways. The online world is supposed to be about human communities coming together, doing human things. The argument I've been trying to make today is that this is the wrong way to look at the internet. The internet today is mostly bots, trolls, scams, and cons. We've created an entire system of incentives which are increasingly getting out of our control and increasingly producing a whole series of bizarre consequences. And the culture of the internet is nowadays being shaped by this sort of stuff. So I think that is the sort of image of the internet that we need to take on. And increasingly, as this stuff becomes more and more fake, and as bots become more and more prevalent, and as it becomes easier and easier to create fake things, I think we seem to be reaching the end, maybe not of truth, but of trust. So losing trust in what we view online. And then the question I want to leave you with is, what does digital culture mean in such a world when we no longer trust anything that we see online? And that's it for today. Are there any quick questions? Okay. So I'll see everybody in the seminars. Next week, we're talking about blockchains and tokens. Don't worry if you have no idea how blockchains work. It's precisely what the lecture is going to be about. What the hell are blockchains and how do they work? So yes, I'll see everybody in the seminars. Yes.
Actually, the time of my seminar is 1 to 2, yeah. But just because I need to go to the police station to register, so can I just attend the...
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
And it was right around like the U.S. midterm elections too. And it was run specifically.
Yes, yeah, I was looking at the